Press Information Bureau, I welcome you all to this important press conference. As we all know that we are in the threshold of a digital age, and in the realm of films, the contribution of digital technology has been in fact phenomenal and revolutionary. So in this context, we have with us today an eminent member of uh, Oscar Academy, which is the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. With us today, Mr. Milt Shefter. Uh, he has been the co-author of one of the landmark report on the preservation and conservation of films called The Digital Dilemma. And no discussion of any discussion on the issue of conservation of films would not be complete without a reference to this seminal report. He's also an associate member of the American Society of Cinematographers, and he's also the member of Writers Guild of America. I would like to invite Mr. Shefter to make some opening remarks, and then we'll go for the questions.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Appreciate your coming here. Again, I'd like to thank the festival for its hospitality, and I have to state a disclaimer that I am here as part of the official Academy delegation arranged by Rouge Wall. A good car, excuse me. Use your last name. And I am a member of the Academy, and I sit on their Science and Technology Council as well as other committees. What you will hear from me this morning, however, may involve some personal comments. They do not officially represent the Academy, so I wanted to state that right off. Anything regarding to the reports, the Digital Dilemma 1 and Digital Dilemma 2, which were published by the Academy, the second one in conjunction with our Library of Congress, the comments on that are from the book. Take them as you will. Any other questions you may ask involving personal opinions, please understand they are my personal opinions and do not represent the Academy. And if I don't say that, Cheryl Boone Isaacs, our president, will spank me when I get back to the States. Please.
Any questions, please? You want to ask something? Excuse me. Please use the mic.
Why is the report so important to the future and history of film?
Good question. The first report came about as a result of people being concerned about our sudden rush into the digital technologies without understanding all the implications. The Academy convened a summit of noted figures, chief technology archivists from the Library of Congress, individual archives, other people that were kind of interested in preservation. And as a result of that summit conference, they basically laid the monkey back on the back of the Academy and said, you got to investigate this and do a report because you have, as the Academy, no axe to grind. You don't share the vendor's viewpoint. You don't particularly represent any individual viewpoint. So it will be objective, and we'd like you to do that. So that became the Digital Dilemma 1. And what we found out in our survey, and we interviewed a lot of the studio people. We also interviewed a lot of other organizations outside of the motion picture industry, because we found the problem is not just ours in the motion picture industry. We interviewed science, technology, government, military, big business, and we found the same thing for everybody. Everyone had tremendous amounts of data, and they were storing it in various ways, and no one understood that there was no long-term guaranteed access. And that was the most important point of both reports, because with film, with 120-year life, you could always run it again. You could always see, you could hold it up to a light and see the picture in the frame. With digital, frankly, you just don't know what you have. There are zeros and ones, they're on various types of media, there are no format standards, and every 4 to 5 years you have to migrate to a new format if you want to keep it, and then you don't know how much you have. Our Library of Congress, which is arguably one of the world's largest migrator of data in the print area, admits every time they migrate they lose material, they lose information. Well, that's unconscionable in our industry. We think that, and I'm a movie buff, but we think that the motion picture, the moving image, is our cultural and visual heritage, and it has to be preserved properly so that future generations can see it. And what we did in the early 70s and 80s was discover that the way to properly guarantee that film would be with us was to set a proper environment, build archives that had temperature and humidity controls, and at that particular point, done properly, all degradation stopped. So the image that was frozen in time, if you will, at that point, would last for another 100 years. Well, now we're into the digital world, and there are some wonderful benefits to digital. I'd be the first to admit that. There will be arguments from cinematographers, particularly, about image capture and the fact that you don't have the soft emulsions of film to capture the light and the emotion of film. But realistically, what they can now do in post-production and special effects are things that could not be done in the photochemical system. But again, the problem is you have nothing to preserve, and if you don't have access, it's silly to preserve anyhow. And those are the main issues of the two books. Question back there.
So as you said that one is, at least there is a guarantee as far as analog films are concerned, at least you can preserve it for 100 years minimum. So as far as digital, we are not sure how long we can preserve or we can keep it, the data, right?
Correct.
So what is your solution or suggestion for the new filmmakers who are into digital filmmaking? In what way they can go ahead? The second question is, countries like India, where we have got our own film archives and all, should we continue to digitize the films or should we store it as it is, taking precaution measures?
Two good questions. Let me answer the second one first. Your National Archive here is doing tremendous work in restoration. Example, the inauguration of the Classic Film Festival last night. Absolutely beautiful restoration of Casablanca. If it is originally analog film, the best advice, obviously, is to keep it in film, restore it, and maintain it as analog film. That has a long life. And if stored properly, it's store and ignore. You can keep it, not worry about it. If I were to address a young filmmaker, I would try to find out, and this was the second part of my master class yesterday, by asking questions, what are the concerns you have about getting into digital technology? What are you buying into? Obviously, there are some advantages, but we've also kind of dropped the barrier to creative filmmaking. Anyone with a handy cam can be a filmmaker now. Just look at YouTube. So I think we're losing a lot of creativity there. The medium itself is a problem. The file format's an unstandardized problem, and even display technology is a problem in digital. The only answer, if you are going to be born digital, if you are committed to shooting in digital right now, is migration. And migration just doesn't work. The Storage Network Industry Association report, their 100-year report, just said that. Migration does not work, but it's all we have. Because what you're doing with migration is buying time until we have a potential solution. Your other question is, what is the solution? The hallmark of that solution, the parameter, is a system at least as good as what we had in film and hopefully better. But we don't have it yet.
And you also should talk about the cost effectiveness.
I'm sorry?
Cost effectiveness, preserve restoration as well as converting into digitization.
The cost comparison is always fun. In our report, and we did this objectively, we found out that just the cost of storage was actually 16 times more for digital than it was for analog. In the report, it was reduced to 12 because we took a few more looks at it and said 16 is ridiculous, but 12 is as low as we could get it. Because again, with a digital record, you have to constantly pay attention to it, which involves labor, involves people, involves real estate, involves technology, involves equipment, and all that involves money, which you don't have in film. The people who are proponents of digital capture and digital post-production always claim that it's cheaper. But I've yet to see figures, this is my personal opinion, I've yet to see figures that prove that. Let me give you an example. A normal feature directed in film by a good director, the feature film will run 10,000 feet in the theater. A good director will shoot between 150,000 and 200,000 feet of film. Okay? A digital director, not having to stop to reload the film canister, will continue to let it roll They'll walk out from the director's chair on set. I've seen this. I've seen it in Film City here. I've seen it in the United States. They want to talk to the actors. Keep it rolling, because I don't want to lose that. Go back, sit down, keep it rolling, keep it rolling, keep it rolling. They shoot the equivalent average of 2 million feet. Now, there's a problem with that, because every frame of that has to be encoded before they can edit. There's a cost there. They forget about that. A couple of years ago in Los Angeles, I visited 2 facilities, which coincidentally one was on the floor above the other, 2 separate companies. They were both involved in doing fixes for one of the digital cameras, which I will not identify because of slander. I can tell you its color was red. But each of these suites was making frame-by-frame correction. Now, coming from the analog world, I said, well, wait a minute, don't you correct the single frame and then apply that to the whole scene? They said, no, this camera generates artifacts in each frame. So my mind is thinking this is rather expensive because this is an expensive suite and they're very happy to do the work, etc. So I went back to a chief financial officer at one of the studios who we had interviewed, and of course it was all off the record. And I said, all right, I've just discovered this about this particular project. I haven't seen anything in your line item budget that covers that. Where is that cost? So he looks around in, if I may say, mafia style, make sure no one's listening, and says, well, you didn't hear it from me, but we bury it in distribution. And there's a lot of that going in. The issue, of course, I think, is because we have recognized the cost savings in doing digital distribution and showing digital prints in theaters, some of which are good and some are not. But that has been a tremendous cost saving to the studios. What's interesting to me is that in our survey, we found that of all of the films screened on theatrical screens in the United States, that means they actually made it on a screen, 75% are done by independents. And those are all pretty small amounts of screens, not the big release from a major studio of 3,000 screens. So I can't understand the economics of that, but that's what it is. I have yet to see, as I said, any figures that prove that digital is less expensive than analog. And understand there's problems with both. And I think there's values in both. And I think it's a matter of trying to come up with a combination that works for both. But the first issue is standardization. So we always have it, we can always see it, and future generations can look back and see what our cultural, oral heritage was for this period of time. And when we got to the documentarians, by the way, that was kind of interesting because they had no idea what this was going on. Documentarians use a lot of historical footage. And I interviewed some really good ones. And I said, what's going to happen when you go to a black hole and there's no footage? So what do you mean? We get that all the time. We get video clips. So, all right. In the mid-1980s, across the country, and I believe across the world, we developed a thing called electronic news gathering. It was the use of videotape by news libraries in all the local cities of the States, and as well as the networks. And it was interesting because it was sold on the concept, hey, this is videotape, you can erase it so you can save all the storage space. What no one asked was, if we erase it, what happens to that visual record? So all these small towns across the country that may want to celebrate their 100th anniversary, their 150th anniversary, their 175th, whatever, from 1985 on, there's a black hole. There are no images except a natural disaster, a flood, an earthquake, and maybe an obituary for a famous person. The rest of that history, that visual history, is gone. And the ones that really suffer, I think, are the documentarians. I've been going on quite a long, so I'm sorry. Next question.
Thank you.
Sir, I wanted to clarify. You said the restoration and preservation of digital films is 16 times or 60 times expensive?
The storage of digital records is 16 times that 1/6 of analog.
Thanks for the beautiful film which I saw yesterday. My question is actually, how many frames you have to do to get that beautiful print again?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
How many frames actually you have to do it frame by frame, you said, but how many total frames you have to do for that film? Casablanca.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so your question was how many prints, what?
Frames. Total frames.
Yes.
But you have to do it again.
Restored.
Restore
How
it.
many frames you restored for Casablanca?
Oh, I don't know because I didn't do that here. That was done by your museum, your National Archive, excuse me, the National Film Archive. I didn't do it. Normally when you do a restoration, what happens is that the record you have left, and that may be a composite of several records, several prints, maybe a piece of negative, you have to go through that and see which is the best quality, and then put that together and do two things. Number one, clean it up, which they did in this beautifully, and you have to balance it out. You have the gamma scale, all the grays and the shadows that have to be balanced out, so it's a continuous picture all the way through. I've seen Casablanca, as I mentioned last night, in its nitrate form, and it's absolutely beautiful. But this was a terrific restoration we saw last night. And I was right in the first row looking at the screen.
Just a minute. One more question.
Yes.
How about actually, we have seen the film like old original movie yesterday. How about showing that small clipping of the past so that people get some idea about how the old print was?
I'm sorry, I still don't understand the question.
He was asking that whether he has seen the movie Casablanca yesterday, and this is a restored version.
Yes.
And it would be better to show the original Casablanca and how it was like.
To compare.
Okay, very good point. In order to show the original of Casablanca, you would have to have a theater that for safety reasons is capable of showing nitrate. And you would have to show it side by side. The restoration here took away a lot of the artifacts and the visual damage on the emulsion. That was the beauty of it. In my personal opinion, nothing could compare to the nitrate record. And I've seen the nitrate record, and no, it is not pristine. It's good. The print we saw last night was much cleaner, less artifacts. But the nitrate had such deep blacks, I call them velvet blacks, that I've never seen reproduced. We haven't been able to do that when we do a restoration, in safety film. So the idea is for general distribution, because very few places can project nitrate, you need a good print like we saw last night. Because this, as I said in my introductory remarks, really, it's the story that counts, and how the cinematographer and the director, using mood and shadow, brought that story out with some very good acting, of course. I'm a purist, and I will not say that this was better or worse than the nitrate. It's different. But the more important thing is for people to see this and understand why it's a classic, as you would see Orson Welles, or, I'm sorry, my wife and I are just in love with a picture that was done here in India several years ago called Schwaz. I think that's a classic for your country. This is a universal theme, so well done. And when I used my example yesterday about Fahrenheit 451 and trying to reproduce something verbally, I missed the chance to say that I would not like to verbally try to describe the beautiful colors that your director brought out in Schwaz when he was showing his grandson the last color of the day before he went in for his eye operation. It was just magnificent. In the back, right here, I think in the third row, we have one in the back first, if you don't mind. In the back.
Which one is better to store, tape or digital hard drive?
Sorry?
Which one is better, tape or hard drive? Tape bound?
Oh, okay. In my experience, again, personal, and I've worked with a lot of archives, there are advantages and disadvantages to both. I frankly prefer tape because you won't run into the problem with a hard drive, which is spinning media and you have to keep using. It's not unusual anecdotally for a hard drive to go out after 18 months. I gave an example yesterday, which I won't repeat here, about one filmmaker who lost 7 years of work using a hard drive. But the tape is not, the LTO tape, which most people use, is still not the answer. The problem with that is it has only a 2-year backward compatibility, which means that if you have transferred your material and are saving it on LTO3, for example, right now we're using LTO6, you're out of luck. You've got to find a way somehow of getting that transferred up. So the migration process, format to format, becomes something you have to do, and again, expensive, labor intensive, and you still don't know what you have. Sir?
In America, how many old films, particularly silent period films, have been restored?
I do not know. The good news is that the work continues on. Archives particularly find things that they think are important, that they want to have part of. The Academy Film Archive, did Sanjit Ray, 17 of his prints. The unknown is how many things are out there that are in need of restoration. They have to be identified, and then you have to raise money. You're fortunate here in India because you have a government that's very supportive of that, and it means that your cultural heritage, your audiovisual heritage, is going to survive perhaps a lot more than other countries. In many cases, by the time they get the funds to do a restoration, it's too late. There's not enough left to do it. And of course, in the early days, what we were trying desperately to do was to convert all nitrate to safety film, but they never recognized that there was a problem in safety film called, acetic acid, the vinegar syndrome. So finally, we realized we had to go to polyester. But I think most importantly is the understanding of the need to protect these, and we don't understand in the few years after something has been created what its value is. The Library of Congress has a national registry, and no film is eligible for that for the first 25 years of its life. It has to have been in existence and circulated and screened for 25 years, and then the committee headed by the Library of Congress decides, is this worthwhile to represent the work of a director, a genre, whatever? They even have home movies in that collection, and every year they list 25.
Questions?
Gentlemen here.
Yeah. I have two questions. First one is, could you please tell which are the main disciplines in which you think innovation is required in order to make quantum leaps in our endeavor to preserve films?
Could you be a little more specific there? That was a general question.
No, I was wondering which are the main innovation fields in which innovation is required, so that there could be some quantum jumps in.
Okay, may I answer that question first before you get to the second one? Well, I remember what you're saying. The innovation has to be to come up with a combination of a standardized file format and a long-lived medium. That's what we had in film, and that's what you need for restoration. That's what you need for preservation, because in order for future generations to be able to see this, they have to have access to it. They have to be able to see it. And when you have a medium that has limitations, backward compatibility, or falls apart, or whatever, when you have a file format that changes every year, every 2 years, whatever, you don't have any stability, and you don't have a system that works. And again, we say, hey, film has worked for a long time, and I'm not a Luddite. I don't think film is the answer, but it has to be at least as good as film, if not better. Second question.
Yeah, thank you. The second question is a Digital Dilemma 3 report in the offing?
I used to end my talk by saying that all of those who worked on the two digital dilemma reports hoped that if and when there was a third report, it would be labeled the digital solution. But I'm not optimistic at this point.
So my question is, in layman's language, can you tell us the difference between the two kind of records, digital as well as analog? And then, is it possible to transfer digital to this thing analog?
Okay, let me see if I can bring this down to layman's language, which means that I would understand it, okay? The difference between analog and digital, I think, is fairly simple. In analog, you're seeing the actual image. In digital, it's a coding, a series of zeros and ones, which becomes a digital record. So many zeros, so many ones become so many bytes become the capacity of a film. I think yesterday I was referring to petabytes. There are futurists that say we're generating 5 exabytes of data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those are big numbers. But the main difference is that you're dealing with two totally different ways of capturing information. And particularly in what we call rich media, which is the moving image, much more difficult than data, like a book or a paper. So when a cinematographer is using, right now, film, which has a soft emulsion and allows him to create emotion by lighting on the soft emulsion, which is reflected, by the time that goes through the process and goes into the theater, and you're sitting in a darkened theater with other people, it creates that emotion for you. In digital, and my wife likes to refer to it as television, no matter what it's used for, it's pretty bright, pretty specific, pretty definitive, and it looks like, a live event. Very difficult, in our opinion, to do something that is very emotional. as you can in analog film. In terms of the storage of it, it's quite different. Film, basically, you have 3 master records that you can store. You have the original negative, which was shot in the camera and then edited to the final version of the picture. You have a 3-rank separation, which is your protective device. 3 strips of black and white film, each one of which is sensitive to a primary color, red, blue, and green. When you put them together, you get full color. And you also have an interpositor from which we make what is called a printing dupe negative. We make several of them if you're doing 3,000 prints, and then we make the prints. So several generations off. Digital is a little different. You are capturing this digital information, and one of the problems is that the metadata, the record of that, is not standardized. Most people in production complain bitterly that the difference between pre-production, production, post-production, and the archive, totally different metadata systems. So it's questionable whether you're going to have the information to deal with. And the metadata system is no different than a library. It allows you to find your material. So there's no end-to-end system for that, which everyone desires. The second thing is that the workflow is greatly different. There is a position in a motion picture production that's done digitally called the DTI, which is a digital technician, who's supposed to keep a record of all the different digital records coming into this, from the camera, from the sound, from the special effects, and put that all together. And this is a massive job. And a lot of times, a lot gets lost in the process. So, again, there's a lot of advantages to digital, and there's a lot of things they have to learn better than they do now. It is supposedly a more efficient system. We haven't seen that in the amount of time of production or post-production. It's supposedly less expensive. We've talked about that. I don't believe that is true. And most importantly, I don't think that we've really looked at the consequences of digital production, saying, is this something that a filmmaker wants to create, spend 2 years of his life or more making, and then realize after a couple of years he may not have that record? And that's the saddest part.
As you said, that pre-production, production, and post-production,
yes,
and archive records are different. It is because of generation?
Excuse me?
You said that
yes,
the digital records, pre-production, production, post-production, and archive records are different. It is
yes,
because of the generation?
Well, it's a matter of identifying it in a similar fashion all the way through. In other words, barcode is one of the systems we used for a time. In the pre-production, you're establishing what you want to do, pre-visualization, etc. But the metadata, which is used to describe that, which is in the end record, has to be the same system as we use throughout. Right now it is not. There is no end-to-end system. So that creates a lot of confusion. And of course the archive is at the end of that, so no one seems to care except the archivist what they get. And it's important, if they are the keepers of the frame, to use that expression, that they have all the information of what went into that picture. It's no different right now than going to IMDb and saying, okay, here's the year it was produced, here's the director, the cinematographer, so on and so forth. That's metadata. It's data about data. Next question.
If I may ask you
Oh,
something.
of course, of course.
We have the National Film Heritage Mission, and you're well aware of it here.
Yes.
And it has been striving to preserve the heritage of our cinema posterity. And are you aware of, or can you throw some light on such initiatives taking place in other parts of the world?
Yeah, I wish it was taking place in other parts of the world. I think that you're setting a wonderful example here. Number one, the system works, as you can see, even from the restoration last night. You have a wonderful archive, so much different than the one that we visited 8 years ago when I was first here doing the Pune Film Festival. This one, thank goodness, operates 24/7 with air conditioning. 8 years ago when I was here in the old archive, the air conditioning was shut off every afternoon at 2 o'clock. And when I was in a press conference like this at that point, and I mentioned that, I said, you have a history here that's very important. You have 16mm prints of Mahatma Gandhi, and you are destroying them every afternoon. Because one of the negatives about film, pardon the pun, is that if you change the temperature and humidity in this yo-yo effect, that will have a worse effect than if you just had it at bad temperatures, but at least consistent. Film does not respond well to uneven conditions. So anyhow, the new archive is terrific, but more importantly, this heritage program, I think I think the concept is terrific. The progress that you're making on it, and I talked to Chev about this quite a bit last night, is remarkable. And you're very fortunate to have a government that understands this, is in sympathy with it, and supports it. And I encourage that as much as I can, and I wish more of the world would do that, including my own country.
Sir, one important question when we are talking about national film archives, they are preserving and all. So one thing, basically, awareness has to be created among the people, because in all the states we have got archives and all. This kind of awareness has to be created. Otherwise, they may switch off. They keep the very valid point what you said. We use our 10 to 5 functions during the working hours. Afterwards, it will be shut off. Some of the important artifacts would be keeping. So there is an urgent need to create an awareness, and people like you should interact with archives, and they have to give that.
I'm trying to do my part. I really am. But I must tell you that the short film that they created for the exhibit here, I felt was important, as you know, for anyone that attended my master class. I wanted to show it in the master class. I'm taking a copy back to the States. I think that makes a great case for what I call eternal cinema. But more importantly, we'll never be able to do everything. There's just not enough money and time and effort. So we have to look at those films that are in most danger of being wiped out and get to those. And you're doing that, which is very, very important. I think, secondly, this whole understanding of what film is, it is an art form. And it's no different than a great painting or a piece of sculpture that will reflect what the culture was at this particular time. And that's why it should be saved. And historians would agree with that. Archaeologists would agree with that. We just have to get the governments to agree with that.
How many archives are in US, American?
I believe the number in the U.S. is something like 520, and I believe there's over 1,000 worldwide. This is not only national archives, it's private archives for special collections such as dance and music. In the United States, we have state archives, historical archives, that are responsible for anything done for that particular state in its history.
Every studio in America, do they have their own archives?
I'm sorry?
Every studio, like suppose Warner.
Oh, the major studios. Yes.
Do they have their own archives?
Yes, they do.
Films
they recognize the need for this. I mean, they always had vaults on the lot, usually nitrate vaults. And as safety film came along, they just put the film in the nitrate vaults. Okay. That's when we got to standardization. But what happened was, and I was involved in this when I was at Paramount, films that they used to classify in our language as a B film, not a blockbuster with big stars, an average B film. They could sell that for television syndication starting in the 60s for $35,000, $45,000, $50,000 a pop for a film package. That gave us enough money to preserve it because we could prove, hey, if you can sell it here, you can sell it here. And that's what started the preservation process in the studios. Very practical decision on their part. Understand the studios are not particularly interested in culture. They are business enterprises. And that's fine. I'm a capitalist. I believe in that. But it's also the studios that make it possible for the private archive to have these films, because they don't go after them for copyright protection or anything else. They encourage it. They do a lot of displays of films. I wanted to get back to one point that I think was made earlier here. The best thing an archive can do, besides the kind of film that was done here, is to show the films that are in the archive. Having a film in a vault is wonderful. You're preserving it. But to really get support of what it means, show it. Have constant showings. Let people see what you're preserving. Things like you did last night. That's really the way to get people behind the whole archival movement.
Films made by, say, Buster Keaton or Orson Welles.
Yes.
Who is going to preserve them? Because now,
well,
they are no more.
They are. They're Orson Welles particularly. They just restored another one of his pictures that was found, I think, 20 years ago, and they're doing it in pieces. Fred Chandler from Fox was involved in that very, very much. The films belong by copyright to an owner, and the owners, for the most part, are the studios. In some cases, they are distributors. And these are the people that, number one, have the obligation, if they want to recognize it, to restore it. But more importantly, if they feel that there's a future market, and there is, for much of this stuff. I mean, I don't know about your television system here, but I know in our country, we're seeing old television shows from the 50s, black and white television shows, and they're getting an audience. Obviously, movies have always had an audience on television. So we call it the long tail theory of marketing. It means that there is a potential of revenue for these things long into the future. We don't know what it is beyond today, beyond streaming and DVD, etc. But they'll come up with additional needs. I mean, it may be on your iWatch for all I know. But content is king, and if you own content, it's in your interest, obviously, to preserve it because you're going to be able to help it, your balance sheet. The other part is it has the cultural side, and that's where the archives come in to say this is an important record of a given part of our history, and we have to reserve that so people can see that in the future.
So Shefter, as you rightly pointed out, films being cultural artifacts worth preserving, don't you think that there should be an international commitment on this? Perhaps UNESCO can intervene. What are your thoughts on this?
I think the commitment has to come from the countries where the films are made because it's their heritage that we're concerned with. Without getting politically correct about UNESCO or any other worldwide organization, there are totally different rationales, reasons, cultures in individual countries, and I think we have to protect those, and I think the countries themselves are responsible for that. And it's very easy to put the thing on someone else's shoulder, saying, well, let's have an international consortium to do this and do that and everything else, and there are international archival organizations, but frankly, it comes down to the individuals.
One last question, please.
Sir? Sir, celluloid.
We're going to have two questions. One in the back and one here.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
In the back and then you. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, celluloid imagology has always been the sacrosanct to every passionate cinematographer. My question is very specific here. When we say about the digital dilemma, which means a lot of mind-boggling things since yesterday, when you say today that there would be a digital solution later on, for example, when you just mentioned about the metadata, which all these 4 platforms mention about acquisition, production, post-production, maybe special effects and VFX as well, and lastly the archiver one. Would it be quite wise enough to have a metadata which would be binomial in culture, in nomenclature, so that having understood what the conception of that cinematographer is, which is what helps these parameters of the technology to understand what is being used to transform that particular image into, so that it will be helpful for the archives to understand which metadata to follow and which way. The treatment of the metadata would be able to enhance the quality of archival and restoring images. That's what I personally feel.
To me, metadata is a tool, a research tool, most importantly, a method of finding the item itself, the object. It has that kind of value. While I think the idea of a universal system, even a binomial system, biennial system, I think we have to start at the beginning. And the beginning is how we create it and what the standardization is, and we're not close to that area. It has to start, and in our country it's going to start with the studios, because they're the ones paying for production. They're going to say, okay, here's what you have to deliver. And it will start then in pre-production. And that system, because the studios are vertically organized, will go all the way through to the archive. Once we have that, then we have to have a national standard that everyone agrees to. And once we have the national standard, then we have to go to international standard. And yes, I agree that is the ultimate aim, but you have to start at the beginning and build the pyramid from the bottom, not from the top.
Thank you.
Sir.
Milt, there are many organizations who are working independently for this cause of preservation, like AMIA, for which you had been a president also. But those organizations are working mostly in the Western countries. We don't get the benefit of it in countries, Asian countries or India. What is your thoughts? Can we extend this networking to other countries other than Western countries or US?
Yes, and there are organizations. You have SAPAVA, which is Southeast Asia. IFFI, of course, which is an organization of organizations And the MIA, which is international, is an organization of individuals. So there are a lot of ways to get involved in that and to cooperate in that, and I think it's more than welcome. I don't think, in my opinion, the states are insular. I think they're more than willing to share and to learn, both. I mean, we don't know everything. And one of the reasons the Academy supports this type of delegates coming here, Michael, Mark, myself, etc., is because we want to share whatever knowledge we can and get people involved. We also recognize that filmmaking is an international enterprise. It's why the Academy Awards recognize foreign films, why the Student Academy Awards recognize foreign films. We call them foreign, forgive me for that, it's not politically correct. What we really mean is it's not made in the United States. But we recognize and judge on the same basis. So I think there's an awareness of this, but again, I refer to last night. I think when you show the work of the archive and restoration and what we're doing, people will understand. Because if that wasn't done, you'd never be able to see that and share that wonderful experience in a great theater last night of a classic picture. And that's a great experience. That's where you want to spend 2 hours of your life. I'm an Academy member and I have to vote, and I have to see 200 films at the end of the year to vote on. And a lot of times my wife and I will say, we just spent 2 hours of our life, and why? How did that film get made? But you know, we have to look at it. Sir?
There's one more question. Last question, perhaps.
So in the work of preservation, cataloging is also one of the aspects.
Very important part. That's the metadata.
When you have to catalog your records, so means how do you decide whether, because I can ask anyway. Like in libraries, we search the book by the name of the maker, then by the subject. How do you do in these records? Is there
there are parameters.
Structured process of
Sure. The difference are the systems in which you record this information, the various metadata systems, but the requirements are pretty much the same. You always want to know the conditions under which the film was made, the type of equipment that was used, obviously the crew that was involved creatively, below the line, above the line, actors, plot. In the case when I was the archivist at Paramount Pictures, we actually tracked the history of that film once it was out of distribution. So for example, if we had done a restoration on it, or we found another element in a foreign country from a World War II contract that we could add to it, that was all made part of the record. So we tracked everything that happened to that particular title. And our title system was a unique title. That's what it was named by. Now, as you may know, that some films change their title when they go into foreign distribution. And my favorite was Beverly Hills Cop 2, an Eddie Murphy film. But it had 4 different titles even in the United States. So we generated what was called an AKA file, as known as. So the primary title was Beverly Hills Cop 2, Roman numerals, also known as BH Cop 2, Arabic, etc., etc., etc. We had 16 different versions of that title, but it all tracked back by computer to the original title. So yes, there are parameters.
You face problem in such this thing? No problem. It is easy. Is it easy?
I don't think it's easy to start. Nothing is, but I think it requires a system. Once you have a system in place that everyone follows, yes, then it's automatic and therefore easy.
If there are no more questions, let us wind up this discussion. It has indeed been a fruitful interaction with you, Mr. Shefter, and we wish you the best in coming out with a digital solution. So,
we're just putting the monkey back on our back at the Academy, but thank you. Thank you for your attention, too.